Imagine walking down the bustling streets of New York City in the early 1920s. The jazz age is in full swing. Flapper girls with short bobbed hair dance in speakeasies, jazz trumpets echo through smoky bars, and the world feels like it is breaking away from the stiff traditions of the past. But amid this wave of modernity, there are still invisible chains. One of the clearest examples, the act of a woman smoking in public. At that time, society viewed it as unthinkable. A woman holding a cigarette on the street wasn't just frowned upon, it was scandalous. It branded her with shame, lumping her in with prostitutes, rebels, and women who didn't know their place. Cigarettes were considered a man's pleasure, a symbol of masculinity, dominance, and power. Women, in contrast, were supposed to embody purity, obedience, and restraint. That was the cultural programming of the time, and yet something curious, almost theatrical, happened one sunny Easter afternoon during the famous New York City parade. As families filled the sidewalks, enjoying the colorful spectacle of floats and musicians, dozens of elegant, well-dressed women stepped into the streets. With deliberate grace, they pulled out cigarettes, lit them simultaneously, and raised them high. They weren't just smoking. They were declaring. They called those cigarettes torches of freedom. In that moment, the act became a statement. It was no longer about tobacco. It was about liberation, equality, and female empowerment. Newspapers the next day carried photographs of these stylish women, presenting smoking as the newest symbol of independence. It was a cultural shockwave. But here's the twist. What looked like a spontaneous feminist rebellion was anything but spontaneous. Behind this orchestrated display stood a man whose influence would shape the entire modern world, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Hired by the American Tobacco Company, Bernays wasn't interested in simply selling cigarettes. He wanted to sell an idea. Bernays had studied Freud's groundbreaking theories on the unconscious mind. He realized something revolutionary. People don't make decisions based on logic alone. They are driven by hidden desires, fears, and dreams. If you could tap into those unconscious forces, you could guide behavior without people even realizing it. So Bernays crafted a masterstroke. He hired debutantes, women of social influence, to perform that smoking stunt during the parade, ensuring photographers and reporters would capture the moment. By labeling cigarettes as torches of freedom, he transformed smoking from a filthy male habit into a glamorous act of female emancipation. The result? Within a few years, cigarette sales among women skyrocketed. Smoking became chic, fashionable, and even patriotic. Bernays had turned a deadly product into a cultural revolution, not by selling tobacco, but by selling identity. This event marked the birth of what he called the engineering of consent. And it was only the beginning. What makes this moment so crucial in history is not just that women started smoking. It is that humanity crossed into a new era, an era where marketing, propaganda, and psychological manipulation became more powerful than brute force. For the first time, control wasn't about chains, whips, or visible oppression. It was about invisible persuasion, about planting ideas so deeply into people's subconscious minds that they believed those ideas were their own. And here lies the unsettling truth. Once people adopt those ideas, they don't just comply, they defend them fiercely. The victims of manipulation become its strongest protectors, insisting on their right to act, consume, and believe in ways that benefit not themselves, but those who engineered the illusion. What Bernays unlocked was nothing short of a weapon, a blueprint for controlling entire societies by shaping desires and identities. His strategies would soon spread far beyond tobacco. Governments, corporations, and media empires all learned the same lesson: you don't need to control people by force. You just need to make them want their own chains. That Easter parade, with women proudly holding cigarettes aloft, was not merely a publicity stunt. It was a turning point in human history. The moment the modern architecture of control was born, and nearly a century later, we are still living inside that architecture, often without realizing it. This was the spark, but what followed was a fire that would consume every aspect of culture, politics, and personal life. Fast forward a few decades from Bernays' first great experiment, and the architecture of control had become infinitely more refined. By the 1980s, entire societies were already living inside invisible cages, their thoughts filtered, their emotions manipulated, and their choices carefully managed. Yet, most people still believed they were free. In 1988, two men, Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman, lifted the curtain in their groundbreaking book, Manufacturing Consent. What they revealed was not a conspiracy in the shadows, but a system hiding in plain sight. According to their research, the media wasn't just a neutral messenger delivering facts to the public. It was a filter, a gatekeeper that decided not only what stories were told, but also which questions could be asked in the first place. Think about that for a moment. The real power of media isn't simply to tell you what to think. It's to tell you what you're allowed to think about. If a story never makes it onto the screen, into the headlines, or onto your social feed, for most people, it simply doesn't exist. And the stories that do appear come packaged with a frame, a hidden narrative that shapes how you interpret the events. This is why two people can watch the same news segment and come away with entirely different emotions, depending on how it's been framed. But media filtering wasn't the only tool in the arsenal of social control. After the Vietnam War, something unusual happened in the United States. Government studies discovered what they described as a sickly inhibition against violence. In plain terms, the American public had grown wary of war. They no longer had the stomach to support endless military interventions abroad. For an imperial superpower, this was a serious problem. The solution: change the public's perception of war itself. Enter Hollywood. Investigative journalist David Robb, in his book Operation Hollywood, How the Pentagon Shapes and Censors the Movies, documented how for over half a century, the U.S. Department of Defense has been quietly collaborating with film studios. The Pentagon offers filmmakers access to tanks, aircraft carriers, helicopters, soldiers, and even entire military bases. But there's a catch. They only provide this support if the Pentagon gets final approval of the script. This means that countless war films, from Top Gun to Rambo, weren't simply entertainment. They were carefully designed psychological operations. Each film was a piece of narrative engineering, transforming war from something bloody, chaotic, and tragic into something glamorous, heroic, and necessary. Think about the impact. Generations of young men grew up idolizing movie heroes who fought with honor, sacrificed with pride, and returned home draped in the American flag. The harsh realities of war, the civilian casualties, the trauma, the political lies, were erased from the screen. Instead, war was rebranded as adventure. Patriotism was equated with unquestioning loyalty to military intervention. And it worked. When new conflicts emerged, whether in the Middle East, the Balkans, or beyond, the public was already primed. Their resistance had been dissolved, replaced with excitement, pride, and cinematic fantasies. This wasn't brute force propaganda of the old kind, with posters and slogans. This was soft power at its most dangerous, entertainment so engaging that you didn't even realize you were being programmed. You left the theater inspired, motivated, and emotionally conditioned to accept war as a natural part of life. But this manipulation wasn't limited to war. It was, and still is, present in nearly every form of media we consume. The shows you binge, watch the memes you scroll through, the debates you see on TV, each carries an invisible layer of influence. As Chomsky and Herman showed, media doesn't just tell stories. It manufactures the very limits of your imagination. And so we arrive at a disturbing realization: the world we think we live in is, in many ways, a stage. The actors are real, the emotions we feel are real, but the script is written by powers we don't see, with goals we don't share. By the late 20th century, the engineering of consent had moved far beyond Edward Bernays' cigarette stunt. It had become a system, vast, sophisticated, and global. And perhaps its most dangerous achievement was this: it made the public not just compliant, but complicit. The next question becomes, how do you keep entire populations docile, entertained, and distracted so that they don't notice the invisible cage around them? The answer lies in something as old as the Roman Empire and as modern as your smartphone. The Romans had a simple formula for keeping the masses under control: panem et circenses, bread and circuses. As long as people were fed and entertained, they would not question authority. What worked 2,000 years ago has now been perfected into a science. In our world, the circus isn't just gladiators or theater. It is endless feeds of TikTok clips, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, and streaming series designed to hijack your brain's reward system. Former Google executive Tristan Harris, in The Social Dilemma, explained that these platforms don't compete to inform you. They compete to capture your attention, the most valuable resource of the digital age. Every notification, every swipe, every like is calculated to deliver a micro dose of dopamine. The goal isn't simply to entertain. It's to drain the mental energy you could use for reflection, meditation, or growth. After all, who is going to question the system when the next video autoplay is seconds away? Aldous Huxley once warned, "You don't need to burn books if you can make people not want to read them." That prophecy is our reality. But distraction is only one side of the coin. The other is education, or rather, the systematic distortion of it. Schools are supposed to be factories of awareness, places where children learn to think critically about the world. Instead, they have become instruments of programmed ignorance. Subjects that could spark independence or deeper questioning are carefully excluded. What remains is fragmented knowledge, enough to produce obedient specialists who can follow instructions, but not enough to produce free thinkers. Universities, once temples of exploration, now function as ideological factories. Students graduate with expensive degrees, but without the ability to question the narratives shaping their society. They are trained what to think, not how to think. This carefully constructed ignorance would be incomplete without one final weapon: emotional manipulation. Neuroscience has shown us that human beings are not primarily rational creatures. Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking, Fast and Slow, demonstrated that most decisions are made in milliseconds by subconscious processes long before logic enters the picture. Emotions are the true language of the unconscious mind. Whoever controls emotions controls actions. And here lies the heart of the system. Modern marketing, media, and politics are not designed to inform you. They are designed to push your emotional buttons: fear, anger, desire, shame, until you respond like a puppet on invisible strings. One of the most brilliant, yet destructive strategies of social engineering is the systematic sexualization of culture. This isn't accidental, nor is it simply about profit. It is deliberate, calculated, and psychological. By flooding society with hypersexualized imagery through music videos, advertising, movies, and even children's shows, people are kept trapped in the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For men, the tactic is clear. Pornography and cultural overexposure drain vital energy. Instead of cultivating clarity, strength, and resistance, men become chronically fatigued, mentally scattered, and spiritually weak. When sexual energy is conserved, it can be transformed into personal power. When it is constantly dissipated, men remain dependent and easily controlled. For women, the strategy is more subtle but equally devastating. Natural feminine energy, rooted in creativity, intuition, and deep sacred connection, is corrupted by turning women into objects of consumption. This disconnection leaves behind an existential void which consumerism happily fills with products, experiences, and superficial relationships. What emerges is a toxic cycle. Emptiness generates consumption, and consumption deepens the emptiness. But hypersexualization is only one pillar. The second is cultural infantilization. Adults are deliberately treated like children through simplified music, dumbed-down movies, and repetitive slogans. Why? Because children are easier to influence. They accept authority without resistance, respond to simplistic narratives, and rarely question the bigger picture. By reducing culture to the level of a playground, critical thinking is systematically erased. Adults may grow older physically, but mentally, many remain trapped in a childish state, dependent on authority figures to tell them what is real and what to do. The third tool is the classic problem-reaction-solution model. Here's how it works. Those in power manufacture or amplify a problem, whether social violence, economic collapse, or health panic. The public reacts with fear and outrage, demanding safety and stability. Then the same powers present a solution, usually involving more surveillance, more restrictions, and more centralized control. The genius of this method is that the people not only accept the solution, they demand it, believing it was their own choice. Turn on the television and notice the pattern: endless cycles of tragedy, conflict, and fear. These aren't just reports of reality, they are tools of manipulation. Fear keeps populations pliable. Anger directs them against each other instead of toward the real architects of their suffering. This is how entire cultures are pacified, infantilized, and manipulated through desire, distraction, and fear. By now, we've seen how entertainment, media, and culture are manipulated to engineer consent. But the influence doesn't stop there. It runs deeper, into the very foundations of society. Almost every major institution we rely upon, financial systems, pharmaceutical industries, education, food supply, and even spiritual organizations, operates under the same architecture of control. Take the pharmaceutical industry. It doesn't simply sell medicine, it shapes our very definition of health and illness. Natural emotions like sadness are rebranded as clinical depression. Introversion becomes social anxiety disorder. Restlessness fueled by overstimulation is labeled ADHD. What once were normal variations of human experience are now pathologized. And with every new diagnosis comes a new prescription. The result? A society chemically dependent, believing their struggles are personal defects rather than symptoms of a broken system. The food industry follows a similar pattern. Processed foods are engineered, yes, engineered, to hack the brain's pleasure centers. The carefully calculated mix of sugar, salt, and fat isn't an accident, it's the outcome of decades of research into human cravings. These foods don't nourish, they addict. And populations hooked on such diets live in states of chronic fatigue, mental fog, and emotional instability, all of which prevent clear thinking and decisive action. Even spiritual institutions are not immune. Where religion once served as a guide for inner freedom, it is often weaponized to enforce obedience. Fear of eternal punishment replaces authentic connection with the divine. Blind rituals replace personal transformation. Instead of liberating the soul, many institutions now bind it. This system's brilliance lies in its invisibility. The most obedient tiger is not the one beaten into submission. It's the one who has internalized the rules so deeply that it polices itself. This is the ultimate goal of consent engineering: individuals who censor their own thoughts, discipline their own desires, and consume exactly what they are told, all while believing they are exercising free will. A self-imposed prison where the jailer and the prisoner are one and the same. And yet, despite the depth of this control, there is hope. Because there is one thing that cannot be engineered, manipulated, or silenced forever: the natural rhythm of human consciousness. History shows us that cycles of awakening always follow cycles of control, and we are living in such a transition now. Every year, more people are waking up to the illusion. They notice the cracks in the system, the contradictions in the narrative, the emptiness of consumerism. They realize that true freedom does not come from external systems, but from inner transformation. This awakening does not require violent revolution. As George Orwell warned in Animal Farm, replacing leaders without changing consciousness only repeats the cycle of oppression. The real revolution must happen quietly, in the depths of individual awareness. Every time you choose to question instead of blindly accept, every time you resist distraction and invest in your growth, every time you control your impulses rather than being controlled by them, you are contributing to that revolution. The architects of control may seem powerful, but their power depends on one thing: your unconscious consent. The moment you see the mechanism, it begins to dissolve. Awareness itself is the key that unlocks the cage. So the question remains: what kind of tiger are you? The one that obeys without a whip, or the one who dares to break free? The choice is yours, and in that choice lies the first step toward liberation, not just for you but for the world.